Thanks for joining me for more classical art tips. Today we're going to look at tips for using photos for reference for a painting. And we're going to look at a photo of a grocery store in Turkey. And I offer private lessons and consultations online and in person and via video recording at oceanviewarts.com. So here we go, using photos for reference. A grocery store in Turkey, we're going to look at perspective and cropping. So here's the picture that a student took, and it's a great picture. What a great subject to paint a picture of. We're going to look we're going to look at some ways to make it a little more interesting. And one thing is this photo is taken straight on. And we'll find it's a little more interesting to give it a little perspective. And we're going to look at ways to crop it and to kind of simplify the background a little bit. So here we have the photo again. Now we're going to notice there's his subject here. What he's interested in is the grocery store and the person going in, and the car and the cone on the left, and the sofa or chair sitting on the right are just some extraneous details that are not contributing to the picture. So we're going to find ways to adjust this. So the first thing that I did was put this in perspective. Now, I used a program that, I mean, obviously you can't really create real perspective. It just kind of squishes the picture down on one side. But since this is a picture that will be used as a working inspiration, what the student will need to do is to reconstruct the perspective lines anyway. So this is just, we're just developing kind of a thumbnail here to give us some ideas, but we can already see, looking at the picture at the lower left there, that it's a lot more interesting when you have perspective. When the perspective, we have 2-point perspective here in the large picture here instead of 1-point perspective, which is what the original shot was. You do have a feeling of getting invited into the image a little bit more. So that was the first thing we did. Now, just go ahead and notice that things are a little squished shorter here. And you can see that by the height of the person and by the height of the letters on the grocery store and the windows. We're going to adjust that at the very end, so don't worry. But for right now, we have added a little bit of a feeling of perspective. You always want to keep in mind the eye level when you're creating perspective or changing it. And the eye level or the horizon is the level of somebody's eyes. And I'm assuming it looks like the person taking the picture is about the same height as the person in the picture. So that's how we can figure out what the eye level is. And you'll notice that all the lines that would be horizontal that are above the eye level kind of angle down to the left. And all the horizontal lines that are below the eye level angle up to the left. They would meet to a vanishing point on the horizon. And that's how you create perspective. So then I cropped this because we don't need all that other extra stuff outside. We can kind of crop it in. This is like my first initial tryout for cropping. And if I was doing something like this from one of my own photos, I would probably try a few different cycles of what we're doing today and crop it in a couple of different ways. But this was my first stab at it. Notice that because I did that little perspective trick, that the top of the painting on the upper left there, I mean the top of the photo, that's the top of the photo. That little gray triangle behind it is basically just my gray background. So we don't have any portion of the photo there. We'll have to add that in later. So just remember that. We'll take a look at that in a little bit. So the first thing I want to look at is rule of thirds. And that's important at the beginning when you're figuring out your composition. The rule of thirds is that if you divide the shape of your composition, whether it's square or rectangular, doesn't matter, into 9 sections. So that's dividing it in thirds horizontally as well as vertically, the intersection of those lines are a very good place to put something interesting. Now, this doesn't mean you put something interesting at all four intersections, but if you had something interesting at least one, or maybe even two, that's a good thing. So we'll look at this and we'll notice that because of the way I cropped it, and I did that on purpose, that the lower right-hand intersection is kind of in our subject person's back, and that's a good place. We wouldn't want it any lower, so you don't want to be careful about that, but anywhere from his waist up to his head would be a good place. So that's looking pretty good, and it might be adjusted slightly later, but we've got a good start on that. So then we're going to remove some distractions. So when we look at this picture, what we notice above this grocery store in Turkey is probably where they live. And there's a bunch of stuff on the outside. Well, look, that is kind of utility boxes, maybe an air conditioner, a bunch of things that sort of clutter up the background and draw your eye away from the main story here, which is the guy going into the grocery store. So we're just going to get rid of those things. Now, I haven't done a perfect job of this. If you were doing it on this photo, if you wanted to change the photo into a fine art photo, you would do this in Photoshop. But that's not my plan. My plan here is just to create kind of a thumbnail or a basic idea of what things don't have to be accurate. We're just trying to get our values, perspective, and composition looking good. So here's a couple other things that are distracting. So we have a window in the upper right that's kind of a light thing near the corner. We've got the stairs on the right that are horizontal lines that want to take your eye out of the picture. And we got this sort of poster stuff on the left side that commands your attention. All these things are in the outside border, and artists don't want people's eyes to go to the outside border of their painting, because then the eye might leave their painting and go to the next painting and buy that one instead. So the basic role of composition is financial. Artists want you to buy their painting, so they want to keep your eye in their painting. And so one of the ways to do that is to not make outside corners or edges too interesting. Now, these are interesting or commanding attention because of their value. And we have a little value chart on the left here. So what I'm going to do is just change the value on that so they are less obvious. And there we go. So knocking down the value of the lights, and I did also raise the values of the darks a little bit, so there was less value contrast. So that keeps the eye from going outside. But then we notice once we do that, and we're looking overall, we notice this little guy here, which we probably didn't notice before. But now suddenly that everything else has good values, it's shining out like a little spotlight. So we don't want that either. So we'll knock that one down a little bit too. Okay, so then we have this little superfluous stuff. We have a little red, the red bucket is not bad, except that it's probably used for cleaning and it's not very romantic. And I mean, it's not bad compositionally, but it doesn't add too much to the romance of the picture. And then we have this little crate on the right-hand side that wants to draw your eye out of the picture again. So we'll get rid of those. And then we're going to look at the guy. So we want a little more attention on the guy, I think, because he's doing what we want to do. He's going to go into this cool grocery store, and his coat is gray. And there's a lot of other gray in this picture. It's kind of raining, although that makes the bright colors shine out brighter. But his gray makes him kind of fade in. So we could make his jacket a different color. Now I'm just changing these things with blocks of color. So I didn't go into the details of changing the color on his arm, the sleeves or anything. I'm just blocking this in so I can see how it's going to work. And one of the things I do notice here that I can't really do too much with my program, but the top of his head is fading into the background there a little bit. So I would definitely be putting a little highlight on the top of his head to separate his head from that it's kind of blending into that blue, looks like a blue plastic box in the back. But red would be a good color to give his jacket. You could also give it an orangey color. You could also give it a yellowy color. Any of those are way better than gray. But I'm going to go with the red. And so now we're looking at the spot on the left, and because everything's a little heavier on the right, we've got the guy, we've got a larger fruit and stuff. This area on the left is looking a little bit out of balance. If you think of the horizon line kind of having a fulcrum in it and what the balance would be on the right and the left, that's kind of empty. So we did have that red bucket there, but it wasn't really adding to the romance of the image. So I'm just going to add a little more of what's already there. So I got a couple more of those little crates holding some food or whatever. Um, I'm I'm just putting that in there as a symbol for this little thumbnail sketch that we're putting together. I would, if I was painting this, I would probably put something a little different. That actually, what I put there is actually a copy of the little unit on the right-hand side, just to the left of the guy. I just reversed it, but I would make it look a little different and choose whatever colors, probably put a little bit more orange and red there to balance those colors out. So, but that looks like a nice balance now. So now we have to address this empty gray place that really looks like it would be white, painted white, like the rest of the area around the uh, windows. So we'll put a letter value in there. And now we're looking at contrast. So when I look at this and squint my eyes, I want people to look at the grocery store part. But the highest contrast area are up above in the area where I don't want them to look. So we have a very bright white on the left-hand side, notated by the yellow arrow around that window. And then in the yellow arrow in the middle there, we have a very white vertical plank, and then a little cast shadow from it that makes it dark next to on the gray. And if you squint your eyes, that's one of the highest value contrasts in this picture. And high value contrast, we see our values on the left there. High value contrast is where your eye wants to go to. And we do not want the eye to go to the apartments above the grocery store. Our focus here, our story is about the grocery store. So there's a number of ways we can do that. One is to change the values. What I'm going to do with these values is the light ones, I'm going to make them slightly darker, and the dark ones slightly lighter. And we'll see that in the next slide. So there we go. It pushes it back. It makes it less important. When I would be painting this, I would also be painting softer edges on the area that I don't want people to look at, and crisper edges at the bottom. I also, because there's so much gray up there, if I was going to keep that much of the windows showing above the grocery store, and as I said, I might adjust this composition a little bit later, but if I was going to keep that much up there, I think I would want to do something with, I don't know, something bright color up there. Maybe flowers, maybe a flower pot in the window with the drape open. I don't know, something to get a little bit of color up there if I was going to keep that much above the grocery store. So now that we've lightened and adjusted these other values, this door on the right looks very dark, and it's competing with the door in the middle that this guy is about to walk into. And the door in the middle wants to be inviting us to come into the grocery store. And so we want to be looking at that. And we don't want to be distracted by another door that's almost as dark, which we're seeing on the right-hand side, which is also at the edge of the composition, which might want to draw our eye outside the picture. So we want to adjust the values on that door, and I would say make it a little less dark so the eye doesn't want to go there. So there we go, we did that. And you can see how making that door a little lighter immediately helps your focus go to that darker door in the center, which is where this guy is going and where we want to go too, because it looks so gorgeous outside. We want to go in and buy some more of that yummy stuff. And that's the story of this image, really. So when we look at our original photo on the left compared to how we've adjusted on the right. We can see how we've made it a lot more interesting. But the one thing that I really regret not having from the original photo is because we cropped it, we lost that beautiful bit of light on there. And you can see the photo on the left has a feeling that the sunlight is somewhere, even though most of what we're looking at is in shadow. Whereas we don't have that feeling on the right. So, but we can put that back in. So there we go. We put, uh, you know, the angle of that light is dependent on what the buildings are doing on the right-hand side. And since they're not in the actual picture, we can decide that those buildings on the right are doing exactly what we want them to do in order to cast that shadow and allow that sunlight to come through. So we can be in charge of that. Okay, so here we have on the left on the top is our original photo. And the left underneath is what we did with it and how we adjusted. Now, remember I said when I did that, sort of fakey perspective thing, that it squished everything down a little bit and made the guy a little shorter and chubbier, and the letters in the name of the grocery store a little shorter and chubbier. You can see that by comparing those, and you can also see that in the proportion of the windows. So I want to correct that at this point. So I did that on the right. So now the guy is his regular taller self, and the windows and the letters in the grocery store name are all a better proportion. So that's what we have on the right, and to give us inspiration for a painting. I want to go back and check. I've made a few changes and adjusted things. So I want to go back and check and make sure that we're still doing well with the um, rule of thirds. And we are. Looks great. So that's always good to check once in a while when you change proportions or sizes of things. So here we have it. We have the original on the left with a lot of distraction. Our eye doesn't really know where to go. Uh, and that is on the right, improved by all of those changes we made, but especially by cropping in a little smaller, by giving the guy a colorful jacket, and by making the doorway that he's going into the darkest thing up there with him next to that. So this is a really great start. So from here, you might want to do a couple other similar thumbnails. I mean, if I was going to paint this, I would probably try a couple of other compositions. And the other thing that you absolutely will have to do is redraft the perspective, because the perspective that I did was kind of fake perspective just by squishing the picture. It doesn't totally conform to real perspective. And you'd have to do that if you had the photo too, because the camera doesn't see perspective the way we do. The camera only has one eye and we have two. So that makes a big difference. So even if you just started with the photo and with the perspective you wanted, you'd still want to redraft that. So there we have it. I think it's going to make a great painting. And it really lends itself to kind of an impressionistic painting too. So I think this is a great start. And I'll be looking forward to see what my student does with this from here. So thank you for joining me. And you know the drill. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe so I can make some more of these videos. And a reminder that I offer additional educational activities and consultation through my website, Ocean View Arts.